The dust hadn't settled from the wagon wheels when whispers began spreading through Millbrook like wildfire. The traveling circus had rolled into town just as the morning sun painted the weathered storefronts in shades of amber and gold. Children pressed their faces against window panes, their breath fogging the glass as they stared in wonder at the colorful caravan. But it wasn't the painted wagons or the exotic animals that caught everyone's attention. It was him. Samuel, gentle Sam Morrison, stood nearly 8 feet tall, his massive frame casting shadows that seemed to swallow entire doorways. His hands, large enough to palm a watermelon like an apple, hung at his sides as he helped unload the circus equipment. Despite his intimidating size, those who looked closely might have noticed the careful way he handled even the smallest props, the gentle manner in which he spoke to the horses, the genuine smile that crept across his weathered face when children waved from a safe distance. "Sweet Lord in heaven," whispered Martha Henley, the blacksmith's wife, clutching her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "That man ain't natural." Sheriff Tom Bradley adjusted his hat brim lower, his weathered hands resting on his gun belt as he watched Sam lift a wagon wheel that would normally require 3 men. "Reckon we best keep an eye on that one," he muttered to his deputy. "Ain't never seen anything like it." Doom. The circus had been traveling from town to town across the frontier, bringing joy and wonder to settlements hungry for entertainment. Sam had been with them for 3 years now, ever since circus owner Giuseppe Marconi found him working at a lumber mill in Oregon, isolated and alone after his family died in a house fire. Giuseppe saw past the giant's intimidating exterior to the broken, gentle soul underneath. "Samuel, my friend," Giuseppe would often say in his thick Italian accent, "God gave you that body, but he gave you the heart of a poet." And it was true. Despite his fearsome appearance, Sam was the gentlest member of the troupe. He read Bible verses by candlelight, shared his meals with stray dogs, and had never raised his voice in anger, not once in his 32 years of life. The other performers knew him as a protector, a gentle giant who would carry an injured horse on his shoulders or sit all night with a sick child from whatever town they were visiting. But the people of Millbrook saw only what frightened them. As the day wore on, the circus set up in the field just outside town. Sam worked tirelessly, his massive arms moving tent poles and equipment that would have challenged entire crews. Sweat glistened on his brow despite the cool October air, and dust clouds swirled around his boots with each step. The townspeople gathered at what they considered a safe distance, their conversations growing more animated as the hours passed. "I heard tell of a man like that over in Colorado," said Pete Sullivan, the town's only doctor. "Killed 3 men with his bare hands before they could stop him. And that one in Kansas," added store owner William Chase, "tore the door clean off the bank vault." None of these stories were true, but fear has a way of making fiction feel like fact. As evening approached, Sam sat alone on a tree stump near the circus camp, eating a simple dinner of beans and hardtack. The other performers had learned to give him space during meals, not out of fear, but out of respect for his need for solitude. He watched the lights begin to flicker on in Millbrook's windows, each one representing a family, a normal life, something he'd never quite been able to have. "Tomorrow will be better," he whispered to himself, the words carried away by the desert wind. Maybe tomorrow they'll see. But tomorrow would bring something far worse than suspicious stares and whispered conversations. As Sam settled into his bedroll beneath the star-filled sky, he had no way of knowing that across town, in the back room of the Silver Dollar Saloon, a plan was already taking shape. A plan that would turn the townspeople's fear into something much more dangerous. The last thing Sam heard before sleep took him was the distant sound of laughter drifting from the saloon, harsh and cold against the gentle night air. Dawn broke grey and unwelcoming over Millbrook, with heavy clouds pressing down on the town like a suffocating blanket. The air carried the scent of rain and something else, tension, thick and palpable, that seemed to seep from every doorway and window. Sam woke to shouting. "Where is he?" The voice boomed across the circus camp. "Where's that monster?" Sheriff Bradley approached with a group of armed men, their faces hard as the desert rocks. Behind them, a crowd of townspeople had gathered, their whispers creating a low, dangerous hum. Giuseppe Marconi stepped forward, his small frame dwarfed by the approaching mob. "What is the meaning of this, Sheriff?" "My people, we have done nothing wrong." "Stand aside, circus man," Bradley growled, his hand resting on his pistol. "We got business with your giant." Sam emerged from behind a wagon, rubbing sleep from his eyes. At the sight of him, several people in the crowd took instinctive steps backward. The morning light cast his enormous shadow across the ground like a dark omen. "You, Samuel Morrison?" the sheriff demanded. "Yes, sir," Sam replied softly, his deep voice carrying despite its gentle tone. "Is there some trouble?" "Trouble?" Bradley's laugh was bitter. "Son, you're in more trouble than you know. Mrs. Eleanor Whitman was found dead in her home this morning, murdered, and the only tracks outside her window were big enough to belong to only one person in this town." The words hit Sam like physical blows. He staggered backward, his face draining of color. "No, sir, no, I would never. I was here all night. Giuseppe can tell you." "Giuseppe wasn't watching you every minute," Deputy Collins interrupted, "and Mrs. Whitman's window was torn clean off its hinges. Takes someone with considerable strength to do something like that." Eleanor Whitman had been the town's elderly seamstress, a woman who lived alone with only her cats for company. She had been found that morning by her neighbor, her small house ransacked, her life savings, all $47, missing from the tin box under her floorboards. "I never left camp," Sam pleaded, his massive hands trembling. "I wouldn't hurt nobody. Please, you have to believe me." But belief was in short supply that morning. "Look at the size of those hands," someone called from the crowd. "Could crush a woman's skull like an eggshell." "Always knew he was dangerous," another voice added. "Just been waiting for his chance." The crowd's murmur grew louder, more aggressive. Giuseppe tried to speak in Sam's defense, but his accented English was lost in the rising tide of anger and fear. "I read my Bible every night," Sam said desperately. "I ain't never hurt nobody in my life. I swear on my mama's grave." "Your swearing ain't worth spit," Bradley cut him off. "We got evidence. We got motive. Everybody knows circus folk are thieves. And we got a man with the strength to do exactly what was done to poor Mrs. Whitman." What they didn't have was the truth. The real killer was Billy Hutchins, a drifter who had been watching Eleanor Whitman for weeks, knowing about her hidden savings. He had slipped into her house through the back door, which she always left unlocked, taken the money, and left through her bedroom window to make it look like a break-in. In his panic, he had pulled too hard on the window frame, tearing it from its hinges with a strength born of desperation and adrenaline. Billy was long gone now, riding hard toward the Mexican border with $47 in his saddlebags and no intention of ever looking back. But Sam didn't know this, and neither did the town. "Please," Sam whispered, dropping to his knees despite his towering height, "I ain't done nothing wrong." The sight of the giant on his knees should have stirred compassion. Instead, it seemed to inflame the crowd further. "Look at him," someone shouted. "Even on his knees, he's taller than most men standing." "Dangerous," another voice agreed. "Too dangerous to let loose." Sheriff Bradley looked around at the faces surrounding him, angry, frightened, demanding justice. He was a practical man who understood that sometimes keeping the peace meant giving people what they wanted to hear, even if the truth was still uncertain. "Samuel Morrison," he announced in his official voice, "you're under arrest for the murder of Eleanor Whitman." As the heavy iron shackles clicked around Sam's wrists, the sound echoed across the camp like a death knell. The chains, normally used for securing prisoner transports, looked almost delicate against his massive frame, but they held him as surely as if they were made of the strongest steel. "Jail ain't big enough for him," Deputy Collins observed, eyeing Sam's enormous frame. Sheriff Bradley nodded grimly. "Then we'll make other arrangements." 20 minutes later, they led Sam in chains through the main street of Millbrook. The entire town had turned out to watch, lining the wooden sidewalks like spectators at a parade. But this was no celebration. Children clung to their mothers' skirts. Men spat in the dust as Sam passed. Women crossed themselves and whispered prayers. "Look at those chains," someone murmured, "like trying to hold back a wild animal." They stopped in the town square, where the old wooden stock stood beside a sturdy hitching post that had been reinforced with iron bands. It had been built to secure the most dangerous criminals, though it had rarely been used for anything more serious than public drunkenness. Until today. Sheriff Bradley produced a longer length of chain and a heavy padlock. "This is where you'll stay until the circuit judge arrives next month," he announced. "Town's decided it's safer for everyone this way." As they secured the additional chains around the hitching post, Sam looked up at the faces surrounding him. He saw fear, yes, but also something worse, satisfaction. Some of these people were enjoying his humiliation, taking pleasure in seeing the giant brought low. "I didn't kill nobody," he said one final time, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's what they all say," Bradley replied, pocketing the key. As the crowd began to disperse, Sam was left alone in the town square, chained like an animal for public display. The clouds overhead grew darker, promising rain that would provide no comfort and no privacy for the humiliation to come. He bowed his massive head and began to pray, the words lost in the rising wind that carried the scent of approaching storm. For 3 days, Samuel Morrison sat chained in Millbrook's town square like a circus attraction. Only this show offered cruelty instead of wonder. The October rain had come and gone, leaving the ground muddy and Sam's clothes damp and stained. Children threw stones from safe distances, while their parents watched with approval. Merchants set up their stalls closer to the square than usual, knowing the spectacle would draw customers. "Look how they got him trussed up," laughed Pete Morrison, no relation to Sam, despite sharing the surname. "Like a bear at a county fair." The chains had rubbed raw patches on Sam's wrists and ankles. His water came in a rusty bucket, emptied only when Sheriff Bradley remembered. Food was scarce, mostly scraps tossed his way by Giuseppe, who was the only person brave enough to approach. But Sam endured it all with a dignity that went unnoticed by most. Most, but not all. Jack Wheeler had ridden into Millbrook on the second day, his horse tired and his provisions running low. He was a man of average height, but exceptional presence, the kind of person who commanded attention without demanding it. His weathered face told stories of hard years on cattle drives and lonely nights under open skies. 2 Colt .45s hung at his hips, their handles worn smooth from years of use, though those who knew Jack's reputation understood he was faster with his brain than his bullets. At 34, Jack had seen enough of the world to recognize injustice when it sat chained in a town square. "What's his crime?" Jack asked the bartender at the Silver Dollar Saloon that first evening. "Murder," came the quick reply. "Killed old Eleanor Whitman for her savings. Tore her window clean off trying to get in." Jack sipped his whiskey slowly. "Seems like a man that size could have just walked through the front door if he'd wanted." The bartender shrugged. "Who knows how monsters think?" But Jack had spent time around strong men. Lumberjacks, blacksmiths, men who earned their living with their muscles. He'd learned to read character in calloused hands and tired eyes. And what he saw when he looked at the giant didn't match what the town claimed to know. Over the next day, Jack made his own inquiries. He visited Eleanor Whitman's house, examined the window frame that had been torn from its hinges, and noted details the sheriff had overlooked. The angle of the damage suggested someone pulling from outside, but someone much shorter than Sam. The footprints outside the window, already mostly washed away by rain, showed the tread of standard cowboy boots, not the massive bare feet Sam wore most of the time. More telling were Eleanor's neighbors, who spoke in hushed tones about a stranger they'd seen lurking around her house for weeks, a man of average height, with a scraggly beard and nervous eyes. A man who had disappeared the same night Eleanor died. Billy something, recalled Mrs. Harper, Eleanor's closest neighbor. Never did catch his full name. Haven't seen him since that awful night. But Jack's most convincing evidence came from simply watching Sam. On his second evening in town, Jack positioned himself on the hotel porch where he could observe the square. He watched as Sam carefully caught rainwater in his cupped hands to drink, mindful not to muddy the puddles others might need. He saw how Sam gently shooed away stray dogs that came sniffing around, not wanting them to be associated with a supposed murderer. Most telling of all, he witnessed Sam's reaction when a small girl dropped her doll near the square. The child, no more than 5 years old, had been walking with her mother when the corn-husk doll slipped from her fingers and rolled toward Sam's feet. The mother shrieked and pulled her daughter back, but not before Jack saw Sam's face, not the expression of a killer, but the gentle smile of a man who loved children. "Please, ma'am," Sam had called softly, "let me get it for her." But the mother had already fled, leaving the doll in the mud. Sam strained against his chains, not in anger, but trying to reach the toy. When he couldn't, tears rolled down his weathered cheeks, not for his own suffering, but for a child's lost treasure lying just beyond his grasp. That night, Jack retrieved the doll, cleaned it carefully, and made sure it found its way back to the little girl. It was then he decided to act. On the morning of the 4th day, as the sun climbed toward its zenith, and the town began its daily routine of gawking and gossiping, Jack Wheeler walked deliberately into the town square. He moved with the careful precision of a man who had made a decision and would not be swayed from it. Sam looked up as the cowboy's shadow fell across him. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Jack saw something that confirmed everything he suspected. Not the eyes of a killer, but of a man who had given up hope. "You didn't kill that woman," Jack said quietly. It wasn't a question. Sam's voice cracked as he replied, "No, sir, but I reckon that don't matter much now." "It matters to me." The conversation was interrupted by Sheriff Bradley's approach. "You'd best move along, cowboy. This man's dangerous." Jack turned slowly, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. "Dangerous to who, Sheriff? Looks to me like he's the one needs protecting." "He's a murderer," Bradley insisted, but there was less conviction in his voice than there had been 3 days earlier. "Based on what evidence? Big footprints, a broken window. Hell, Sheriff, I've seen smarter investigations done by a blind mule." A crowd was gathering now, drawn by the confrontation. Voices rose in murmur and speculation as townspeople recognized the building tension between the two men. "The circuit judge will sort it out," Bradley said. "Until then, he stays chained." Jack's laugh was cold as winter wind. "The circuit judge? Judge Blackwood? You know his reputation for fair trials, do you? Especially when it comes to folks who look different?" The truth was that Judge Blackwood was known throughout the territory for his harsh sentences and his belief that unusual people were inherently dangerous. A man of Sam's size and gentle nature wouldn't stand a chance in his courtroom. "That's the law," Bradley said firmly. "Sometimes the law and justice ain't the same thing," Jack replied. He turned back to Sam, studying the chains that held him. Heavy iron links, secured with a padlock that would require either a key or considerable force to break. Jack's eyes moved to his own gear, his knife, his guns, the coil of rope hanging from his saddle. "You thinking of doing something stupid, cowboy?" Bradley asked, his hand moving toward his weapon. Jack looked around at the gathered crowd, at the faces filled with fear and hatred for a man who had done nothing wrong. He thought about Eleanor Whitman, dead and unavenged while her real killer rode free. He thought about justice and law and the difference between the two. Most of all, he thought about the tears in Sam's eyes when he couldn't reach that little girl's doll. Stupid. Jack smiled, but there was steel in it. "Sheriff, I'm thinking of doing something that should have been done 3 days ago." His hand moved to the knife at his belt, its blade sharp enough to shave with and strong enough to cut through iron links that had been weakened by 3 days of rain and rust. The crowd fell silent, sensing that something momentous was about to happen in their quiet town. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," Bradley warned, his gun half drawn. Jack looked at him steadily. "Sheriff, you got one shot at me. Better make sure it counts, because if you miss, you're going to have to explain to this whole town why you were so eager to keep an innocent man in chains." The moment hung in the air like smoke before a gunfight, heavy with possibility and consequence. And in that moment, Jack Wheeler made his choice. The blade of Jack Wheeler's knife caught the afternoon sun as he pulled it from its sheath, the steel gleaming like molten silver. The crowd pressed closer, their collective breath held as they watched the cowboy kneel beside the chained giant. "This ain't your business, Wheeler," Sheriff Bradley called out, his voice tight with warning. His gun was halfway out of its holster, but something in Jack's calm demeanor gave him pause. "Making it my business," Jack replied without looking up. He was examining the chain links, looking for the weakest point. 3 days of rain and neglect had started rust forming at several joints. "Sometimes a man's got to stand up for what's right, even when nobody else will." "He's a killer!" someone shouted from the crowd. "You're all fools," Jack said loud enough for everyone to hear. He stood slowly, turning to face the gathered townspeople. "I've spent 2 days investigating this supposed crime, and I'll tell you what I've found. A whole lot of fear and not much evidence." "Doctor," Sullivan pushed forward through the crowd. "We found the footprints." "You found boot prints from a man about 5'8", Jack interrupted. "This man here goes barefoot most of the time, and when he does wear boots, they're size 16s. The prints you found were 11s, maybe 12s at most." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Several people exchanged uncertain glances. "The window was torn off from outside," Jack continued, his voice carrying the authority of absolute certainty. "But the angle of the damage shows it was done by someone much shorter than Sam here, someone who had to reach up and pull down with considerable desperation." "That don't prove nothing," Bradley insisted, though his gun had slipped back into its holster. "No, but this might." Jack reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a piece of cloth, rough cotton, stained with blood. "Found this caught on a splinter of Eleanor's window frame. Notice the weave, the color. It's from a work shirt, common enough, but look at the size." He held up the torn piece. Even allowing for the tear, it was clearly from a garment made for someone much smaller than Sam. Giuseppe Marconi had been standing silently at the edge of the crowd, but now he stepped forward. "Samuel, he has only 2 shirts, the circus owner said in his accented English. "Both are here at the camp. Both are clean. Furthermore," Jack added, "I had a long talk with Mrs. Harper yesterday. She told me about a stranger who'd been lurking around Eleanor's house for weeks. Billy Hutchins, she thought his name was. Average height, scraggly beard, nervous disposition. Anyone seen Billy since the night Eleanor died?" The silence that followed was telling. Several people looked around, as if suddenly realizing they hadn't seen the drifter since that night. "Billy rode out that same evening," added Tom Miller, who ran the town's only boarding house. "Paid his bill in silver dollars and said he had urgent business in Mexico. Thought it was odd at the time, him leaving so sudden-like." The crowd was wavering now, uncertainty replacing the solid conviction they'd felt just moments earlier. Jack could see doubt creeping into their faces like cracks in a dam. "But the strength it would take," Dr. Sullivan began. "A desperate man can do amazing things when he's running for his life," Jack said. "Fear and adrenaline can make anyone strong enough to tear a window frame loose, especially an old one like Eleanor's." He turned back to Sam, who had been listening to the exchange with growing hope in his eyes. "You read the Bible, don't you, Sam?" Jack asked. "Yes, sir. Every night." "What's your favorite verse?" Sam didn't hesitate. Matthew 5:5. "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." Jack smiled grimly. "Not exactly the words of a killer, are they?" He knelt again beside the chains, positioning his knife at the weakest-looking link. "Sam, I need you to hold very still. This blade's sharp, and I don't want to cut you by accident." "Wait," Sheriff Bradley called out, but his voice lacked the authority it had carried earlier. "You can't just—" "I can and I will," Jack said firmly. He began working the blade against the iron, using the technique he'd learned from an old mountain man years ago. The rust helped, flaking away as he sawed through the metal. This man has been humiliated and tortured for 3 days, based on nothing but fear and lazy assumptions. That ends now. The first link parted with a sharp crack that seemed to echo across the square. Several people in the crowd took involuntary steps backward. Sam looked down at his partially freed hands with wonder, as if he'd forgotten what freedom felt like. "Almost there," Jack murmured, moving to the next weakest link. His knife bit into the metal with steady, determined strokes. "This is illegal," Bradley protested, but he made no move to stop what was happening. The doubt in the crowd had infected him too. "So is chaining an innocent man like an animal," Jack replied. The second link gave way, then a third. Suddenly, Sam's hands were free. The giant sat still for a moment, staring at his hands as if he couldn't quite believe what had happened. Slowly, he rubbed his raw wrists where the shackles had chafed them bloody. Jack moved to the ankle chains, working with the same steady precision. These links were thicker, more difficult, but his blade was sharp and his determination absolute. "Why are you doing this?" Sam asked softly. Jack looked up at him. "Because a long time ago, somebody did the right thing for me when nobody else would. Figure it's time to pass that along." The ankle chains fell away with a final metallic clatter that seemed to signal the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Sam rose slowly to his feet, his massive frame unfolding like a mountain taking shape. Free of his bonds, he seemed even larger than before, but somehow less threatening. The crowd that had jeered and thrown stones now watched in hushed silence. "I didn't kill Mrs. Whitman," Sam said, his deep voice carrying clearly across the square. "I never hurt nobody in my life, and I never will. I'm grateful to this man for believing in me when nobody else would." He turned to Jack, tears streaming down his weathered face. "Thank you, sir. I ain't got much, but anything I have is yours." Jack clapped a hand on Sam's massive shoulder. "Just live free, Sam. That's payment enough." Sheriff Bradley stepped forward, his face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "This ain't over, Wheeler. You had no right." "Sheriff," Jack interrupted, "I suggest you put some effort into finding Billy Hutchins. Real killer's probably halfway to Mexico by now, but he might have left more evidence behind. Check the places he stayed, ask around about any sudden spending of silver dollars. Do some actual investigating instead of just looking for the most convenient suspect." He turned to address the entire crowd. "All of you should be ashamed. You took a gentle man and treated him like a wild animal based on nothing but his size and your own fear. Sam here's got more Christianity in his little finger than most of you have in your whole bodies." The crowd began to disperse, people drifting away with downcast eyes and uncomfortable expressions. Some muttered apologies as they passed Sam, though most couldn't meet his gaze. Giuseppe approached, his weathered face creased with relief. "Samuel, my friend, are you all right?" "I'm fine, Giuseppe," Sam replied, though the marks on his wrists and ankles told a different story. "Just grateful to be free." Jack was cleaning his blade and preparing to sheath it when Sam spoke again. "Mr. Wheeler, I don't know how to thank you proper." Jack looked up at the giant's kind eyes and gentle expression. "You want to thank me? Next time you see someone being treated unfair, you remember what it felt like to be chained up here, and you do something about it if you can." "I will, sir. I surely will." As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the town square in shades of gold and amber, Sam gathered his few possessions and prepared to leave Millbrook with the circus. The chains that had held him lay broken in the dust, already gathering rust and desert sand. Jack mounted his horse, tipping his hat to Sam one final time. "You take care of yourself, big man." "You too, Mr. Wheeler, and thank you again." As Jack rode out of town, he could hear the sound of the circus packing up behind him. By morning, they would be gone, taking their gentle giant to places where people might judge him by his character rather than his size. The broken chains remained in the town square for several days, a reminder of shame and injustice that made the townspeople uncomfortable. Eventually, someone collected them for scrap metal, but the memory of what they represented lingered much longer. 3 weeks later, word came that Billy Hutchins had been arrested in El Paso, caught trying to spend silver dollars that matched the coins stolen from Eleanor Whitman. He confessed to the murder when faced with the evidence Jack had suggested the sheriff look for. But by then, Sam and the circus were long gone, traveling the endless roads of the frontier, bringing wonder and joy to places that needed both. And sometimes, late at night around a campfire under stars as vast as infinity, Sam would tell the story of the cowboy who saw past the surface to the man beneath, the cowboy who had the courage to break the chains when nobody else would. It was a story worth remembering in a world that too often forgot the difference between justice and law, between fear and wisdom, between the size of a man's body and the measure of his heart.